This week I've been inspired by a few different people. The first was a meeting with someone called Phil Robertson, who I got to know via Twitter, and I realised that we just shared the same values, had the same fears for the future of education and the same hopes for the future of education. He then recommended to me a book by Debra Kidd called A Curriculum of Hope, which I ordered, and as soon as it arrived I started reading it. An absolutely amazing book, absolutely fantastic, and I really strongly recommend anybody in education, and especially anybody in leadership in education or aspiring to leadership in education, it's a book you need to get. It's easy to read. I've started it, and I'm dyslexic, and I've already read the introduction and the first chapter, and I've been working solidly, so I didn't have much time to do that reading, but it's so readable, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. I also spoke to somebody at something called High Performance Learning, which I'll also come back to, and I watched a TED talk by someone called Rita Pearson. She was talking about championing our children, and it was like looking in a mirror. She was just incredible in terms of her passion for the children and keeping the children at the heart. There was a beautiful story she recounted, which was somebody who was doing a test out of 20 and they got +2, and he said, "Does that mean I got a fail? I got 18 wrong?" And she's like, "Yeah, but you got 2 right, you know, you're on the way." And it's that positive attitude, that building our children up, giving them a confidence which matters so much. I read a book several years ago now called I'll Be a Zero, which was about the disheartening truth in the child's mind about the results of a test. You know, somebody can be getting 5 out of 10 for a spelling test, for example, every week, and so they get told they've made no progress. That's not necessarily the case. 5 out of 10 could have started with totally bizarre spelling choices. They made no sense. You couldn't even work out what the word was meant to be. They could have gradually moved through the different stages of spelling to have eventually got to, you know, maybe some omissions, some additions, close phonics, eventually phonetically correct. So from bizarre to phonetically correct, so that you could know what every single word is, and yet they'd still get 5 out of 10. So they look like they're getting no progress, but actually that's tremendous progress. And there are ways, and I've developed means of assessing this so that you can see the real progress a child is making when the results look like no progress whatsoever. This is that whole business of data being just numbers unless we know the story behind the numbers. Data is more than mere numbers if it's going to actually help us to support our children and recognise their growth and development. So I'm going to start with, I think, the pillars. This is something which, this is this high performance learning. It looks at 2 main aspects. You've got the values, attitudes and attributes, and you've got sort of being empathetic. So you have collaborative learning, being concerned for society, having a confidence. Then you get the agility of mind, so being inquiring, being creative and enterprising, being open-minded, very important, and taking risks. You know, we live quite often with children who are actually quite risk averse, and being risk averse means they don't learn. If you're frightened of making a mistake, you're not going to push yourself further. If I were risk averse, I wouldn't now be Dr. Cohen. I wouldn't have that qualification. I got it because every time I got the feedback of where I needed to develop, what I wasn't doing right, I learned from it. I built on it. I developed. And it took me a long time to get my doctorate, but I learned through the process. Now, if I'd been risk adverse, if I hadn't had this other aspect, the hard-working aspect, the resilience, perseverance, practice, going over and over things, I wouldn't have got that. It's it simply wouldn't have happened. I'm dyslexic and I struggle with reading, I struggle with writing, but you get there if you're not risk averse and if you've got that resilience. Now, currently we have a system which is very much exam focused, data focused. Well, that makes people risk averse. They've got to get it right. If you've got to get it right and you're just learning something to pass a test, that isn't preparing you for life. That isn't giving you skills that you're going to need. But what it can do is really damage your self-esteem. So that's one aspect of this HPL, high performance learning. The idea is that you do it with the students and not to the students. You get parental involvement. And it looks at, as well as the values and attributes and attitudes, you have these cognitive performance, the characteristics of a learner. So meta thinking, being able to understand how you think and regulate your own thinking and your own actions and the way you approach work. Making links, making connections between things, seeing the whole picture, the detail, the bigger picture, to take abstractions and to apply things to other situations, to have that imagination, to then be able to analyse, so the critical and logical thinking, the precision, to be able to take it through step by step and build up. Then there's a creative aspect, to be able to create. That's not just necessarily artistic. There are the arts and the creativity there, but also being able to play with something intellectually. Wordplay is a form of creating in English, when you start playing with words. When you discover that lovely, there was something in Latin in Virgil's Aeneid where you had, the twins were surrounded by a snake. Now, I haven't done Latin for, gosh, for about 40 years, but I can still remember there's this one bit where they take the word circumdate, which means to surround, and they put the circum, then the word Gemini for twins, and then the date, like that, so that the word itself is surrounding the twins. You've got circum, Gemini, date. And I was like, wow, that was such an amazing thing. And it's playing with words, but if you need to actually have that ability and the confidence to play with your learning, to really engage with it on that deeper level. And that's part of the creativity and the fluency and having original ideas. And then this realisation, this where it becomes automatic. You get the speed and the accuracy because you've done it. The reason I got a lot of accuracy in my dyslexia assessment, for example, is because in teaching phonics, in teaching English, I have overlearned. I have practiced and rehearsed these skills. I'm still slow at them, but I'm accurate because I've learned it over time. So couple that with this idea of the curriculum of hope. And this again, it's about looking at where the child is, not just looking at, oh, we've got to pass the test. Yes, we have to pass tests. You know, there are tests, there are assessments and so on. But it's about how we manage the journey to get there. Do we do the journey where we do it to the children and we tell them things and we take a set curriculum off the shelf and it prescribes how we're going to deliver it, and then we just deliver that and expect them to be empty vessels that will just learn? That's not, they're not passive receptors in education. They're active participants, or at least they should be. Quite often they are passive recipients of whatever the teacher wants to give them. But that doesn't challenge their thinking. That doesn't enable them to cope in society. That doesn't allow for the differences, not only of intellect, but of exposure. What have these children been exposed to? What are their home lives? What is their own understanding of the world? If we just take information and give it, we're not taking any of that into account, and we are expecting, without allowing for participation and engagement, we're expecting people to just blindly receive it. That doesn't help society to move forward. That doesn't actually serve any long-term purpose that's of value as far as I'm concerned. I feel very strongly that we need to encourage children to think. We need to engage them in their learning, and sometimes we start teaching one thing and we go off on a tangent. I as a teacher, teaching when I've had to cover a maths lesson, for example, with my dyslexia, I'll often get numbers the wrong way round. So 34 might read as 43, for example. I get it wrong. I tell the child I've got it wrong. There's nothing to be ashamed of. I made a mistake as an English teacher. I'm forever asking my pupils to point out if they think I've made a spelling mistake. And then we'll have let's find out how it's spelled, we'll look at it together, somebody will get a dictionary and they'll tell me how to spell it. And sometimes it's like, yay, I got it right actually, whoa, whoa, whoa. Other times it's like, oh, I'm sorry, thank you for pointing that out, let's correct it. If I can be confident in my errors and realise I learned from them, that allows the child to do that. That's engaging with, not doing to. The same thing as, we had a lesson where we were going to be doing creative writing the following week, fantasy stuff, and it was amazing. The Friday before, we were in assembly, and this deep fog, mist, whatever it's called, had descended, and you could hardly see more than a few metres in front of you. And I just looked at I was teaching year 4 at the time, I looked at my fellow year 4 teacher and said, we've got to use this. And we went back to the classes afterwards. Luckily it was still foggy, and we went for a walk, and we stopped on the walk and just felt things, wrote down words, said words that meant anything to us. We looked at what we could see and what we couldn't see. We described the feel of things, and we saw buildings ahead of us gradually come into view as we approached them, and then as we turned behind us, where we'd come from had obviously disappeared into the mist. And then we came back, and the same thing, we got back to the class and we just let the kids talk. The following week, their writing, their language for fantasy writing was so rich, because I hadn't just told them about, well, you need to use similes and you need to use adjectives and you need to use adverbs. We'd talked that through on our walk, we'd experienced it, we'd had conversations, we'd engaged with it. Because it was something real to them, when they actually went to write their stories, they had something here with which to work that was actually a real experience of theirs, a lived experience. When we do rhyme, we do playground rhymes, they make up their own. We go out in the playground and we try out their rhymes, we try out their actions, making it real, engaging with them. The book, A Curriculum of Hope, I'm only just starting it, and I'm already hooked and strongly recommending it. It tells us of another way of doing things. It allows for flexibility, which is what I've been banging on about in the last few weeks. We need a flexible curriculum, we need a flexible approach, we need creativity, imagination, and taking the children with us on our journey, but going with them on theirs. It's not a one-way process. Education is a two-way thing, and we need to go on the journey of our children, as well as just assuming they can take what we have and just learn it and regurgitate it. We're looking to create more for society than just automatons who are regurgitating facts that teachers have chosen to give them. Thank you.